Ryan Curtis, welcome to the Pace Performance Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you, and thank you very much for getting me into a very busy schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you having me. I've, listened to the show for quite a while, so it's an honor.
No, pleasure. So you're in Vegas at the minute with
Yeah, yeah,
Summer League?
yeah, absolutely. Vegas. Been here for a few days. We've, have several young draft picks that, we're able to see play and some other players as well. So it's a good developmental opportunity for some of our guys.
And it's the NBSCA, or has been the NBSCA event, or is that coming up while you're
Yeah,
out there?
so NBSCA is going on here. They've had, several events, some tech summits and so forth. So always good to connect with those guys.
Absolutely. No, it looks a great lineup. I was very jealous when I saw the lineup, and I thought I'd love to get out there at some point and be a part of that conference. Is it always in Vegas, the NBSCA conference?
No, they've, well, yes, they do have a conference that's in Vegas, during summer league, but there are quite a few events throughout the season, especially at the draft combine when we were there, a month ago. They're really good about putting on really quality events.
Nice. Cool. Well, anyone doesn't know who you are, Ryan, would you mind just giving us a bit of a background on you? How you've got to where you've got? I think it's an interesting journey. So over to you.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, I would say, my journey's been relatively varied. I always like to start, I'm an athlete first. I think my career started as an athlete. I played at a very small school in Northeast Missouri. I played at Culver Stockton College and played football, American football. I was a linebacker, and at that point in time, I was all about sports. That was my primary motive. But I knew that I wanted to be in sports for my career. I knew that at a young age, and athletic training was what I pursued initially. It was a really great background from a sports medicine perspective. Really laid a lot of foundations for me in my career. Got an opportunity at Kansas State after that to work as a graduate assistant athletic trainer. Was able to work under some really quality personnel and individuals there. Got my master's in kinesiology at the same time. Got my first real job was with the United States Marine Corps, which was just a really unique opportunity. Was hired on there as a athletic trainer and strength and conditioning coach. It was kind of a dual role position. A lot of the positions that I've had throughout my career have been kind of dual role, which I really enjoy. I think strength conditioning and sports medicine are very closely aligned. But yeah, so I was out at the Naval Air Station in Pensacola, Florida, working for the Marine Corps. Shortly, there was kind of a short stint there. I was able to get an opportunity with the United States Tennis Association. Um, I hadn't had a ton of experience when I was at Kansas State. I'd worked with football, I'd worked with tennis, but had minimal exposure to tennis. But they were looking for a dual role individual, strength conditioning, athletic training. They had a great youth program plus all the pros and such that were in and out of that facility. I was based in LA for that opportunity, and was able to work there. That was how I first met Mark Kovacs, who I know you've had on the
Couple of
show.
times.
He's
Yeah, yeah.
just a brilliant mind. So that was my first exposure to what I would say is a quality real sports scientist, and he's been a great mentor for me from day one, and somebody that I've been able to lean on throughout my career. Um, but yeah, at the USTA for a few years, got some opportunities to start working privately with some players on the ATP and WTA tours. So I ended up spending about 3 years working with various pros, both on the male and female side, just kind of as a personal strength conditioning coach, personal athletic trainer. Really great experience, wonderful at that time in life. Lots of travel, of course, and anybody who's worked for themselves understands that there are going to be lulls occasionally. So in those lulls, uh, I'm originally from Columbia, Missouri, so I asked the individuals at the University of Missouri, can I come volunteer my time and just gain experience, because I'm always looking to improve in even with any opportunity that I can find. and was able to, help out there, when I wasn't traveling. And it ended up being kind of one of the more influential, decisions of my life to volunteer somewhere, because I got the chance to work with people like Pat Ivy, who is now at the University of Louisville. He's heading up, the program there. He was getting his PhD in psychology at the time. We had Brian Mann, who was getting his PhD in exercise science, and obviously, the leader in kind of the VBT space and other spaces as well. And then we also had Andrew Paul there, who was, getting his DPT at the time. And now he's, director of performance, I think, in rehabilitation for OKC. So it was just amazing. I think that opportunity, I didn't realize at the time, but you realize after, like, all the rock stars that were in that, place at one time. And it was just a pleasure to kind of really learn from those guys. And they really taught me, not verbally, but just through their actions, essentially, that, you have to continue to push yourself. And that was when the spark hit in my mind of, you might want to consider, progressing yourself in your career, from an academic standpoint. So I knew, like, I was more analytical in nature, and I had interest in sports science and data science. So I made the decision to kind of leave what I was doing on tour to start this PhD journey. And I ended up being, talked to several schools, but I ended up settling on the University of Connecticut. I had just really great interactions with my advisor, who was Dr. Doug Casa, who's just a leader in the heat and hydration space. And he had started a nonprofit called the Corey Stringer Institute. And they were really interested in a lot of sports science initiatives at the time as well. So we were getting grants for, with the NCAA to do large athlete monitoring projects. So that ended up being my dissertation while I was there, and was able to work really heavily in soccer at that point in time, and just study sports science. What I ended up doing was, and they were really good about allowing me to kind of develop myself in the way that I wanted to, which I knew kind of the future of sports science was you're going to have pretty significant data skills. So a lot of my coursework was in our business analytics department at UConn. So taking courses on, database management, understanding relational databases, learning SQL or SQL, modeling, forecasting, predictive algorithms, things of that nature. So I really tried to upskill as much as I could, in addition to kind of my exercise science route. But yeah, graduated, finished up in 2019 there, and then I would say pretty shortly after got the call from the Spurs, which is where I've been, since then. And I'm in a sports science and / kind of performance coach role currently. I would say, the balance is 90% sports science, really heavy on the data side, but they still let me work with athletes, which I love to do. So
nice.
It's been a good.
And how important is that, Ryan? That last little bit that you said, that you still have connection with the athletes. I know. Not only from you, but from a skill set perspective.
Yeah, I've had to think on that for quite a while, and the conclusion that I've come to essentially is that if you're integrated and you're working with practitioners side by side, you understand and see what the problems are and what they're dealing with. And then also you as a performance coach or you as a medical practitioner, you can more readily see kind of where the gaps are and where the holes are that need to be filled, or the inefficiencies, or where you can be more effective in particular areas. So I think it's important. Now, in every situation, that's, it may not be work, but it depends on the organization, depends on, where your team is at. But I think it's massively beneficial for me to be able to do my job on the sports science side more effectively.
If you don't mind, just so everyone's aware, when we line up a podcast, I fire over 3 main points, and then we have these kind of themes that run through. can we jump to the third point around data, Ryan? Is that all right?
Yeah, sure.
It seems to fit in here quite nicely. And my thoughts around this topic was based on your background, knowing that you were a performance coach, primarily from your background, but had gravitated towards the sports science and the data side. And then it took me back to a tweet that Jose Fernandez, someone that we both know. You know Jose more than I do, but I'm getting to know him a lot more with what we've got going on at the minute. A tweet that he'd put out around the minimum required data skills for an S&C coach or performance coach, which got as it does on Twitter, a polarizing response. But I'd love to put that to you and get your opinion whether there are minimum skills to be effective and efficient as a strength and conditioning coach or performance coach, or do we not need that? That's just a preference and it depends on the organization. But do we have minimum requirements is what I'm saying as an S&C
Yeah,
coach.
yeah. No, it's a great question, and Jose's done, I think, an excellent job of being very thorough with his answer. Yeah, thank you, I guess, for the polarizing question. I'm sure we'll get blown up on Twitter, but I see both sides. I think to the latter point there, I think it depends on the context of the situation that you're in. I think there are instances where a coach really, I hesitate to say zero, but I mean really close to zero as far as data skills, where they would need particular data skills. You think about somebody who's in a pro sports environment. A strength coach is surrounded by sports scientists, data scientists, and so forth. They're the ones that are kind of organizing data structure and reporting systems. So there are minimal skills that are actually needed. You think about certain coaches are good at are much better at other things. You think about they're experts socially and that motivating players. So you still want them in their organization, even though they may not be able to assist kind of from a data perspective. You think about also particular coaches that are really good on court or on pitch. You think transitioning, return to play, things of that nature. Are they still adding a ton of value to your organization, even though they don't have data skills? 100%, and you can't replace those individuals. Ideally, you would love for them to have some sort of skills, but it's going to depend on the team and organization. As you start getting, I guess, in situations and organizations where there are less data skills, then you're going to need to be more self sufficient. And I think that's my general, I guess, thought pattern and kind of my mode of operation and how I've been throughout my career is you want to try to be as self-sufficient as possible. So I think having knowledge as a strength conditioning coach on kind of the data pipeline in the sense of data collection, how to do that appropriately, understanding validity, reliability, understanding how you're going to store your data, whether that's through an athlete management system, or maybe you're going to go through an Excel or CSV storage system. Having some sort of I guess, analysis skills. Hopefully you've acquired some sort of visualization and then some sort of reporting, because whatever you're collecting, you're going to want to disseminate, whether that's to athletes, coaches, front office, whoever it is. So as I said, basic data management skills, being able to work with athlete management systems, if you're lucky enough to have those in your organization, because you think about AMSs such as Edge 10 or Coach Me Plus or Smartabase, they have particular forms and data structures where you enter information either manually. So it's already going to control a lot of the issues that you would have if you're working in an Excel or a CSV document where you type a letter in a numeric column, or you have inconsistencies. There's you're not using data validation, so you mistype, you use caps and for a particular list or something of that nature. So AMSs are a great way to overcome, I guess, those issues. So you're not spending a bunch of time on the back end, cleaning data. In general, I think having knowledge of what's wide versus long format and data structures, I agree with with Jose on those areas. I think the ability to just do basic summary stats, which I mean we all learn, before eighth grade, which is looking at minimum, maximum, looking at range, standard deviations, coefficient of variation, things of that nature. Being able to do that by group, so in Excel, that would be something like a pivot table, which I'll be the first to admit. My Excel skills are probably that of like a fourth grader. I don't work I don't work in Excel very much at all, to be honest. I work primarily in different programming languages, so I work in R and SQL, and that's how I manipulate data. But a lot of people work in Excel, and it's a wonderful tool for most people. I think also if you can develop some skills in transforming and in mutating data, being able to create new variables. So you think about like, how are you going to express, an athlete's score? Well, you're probably going to express it. You want to standardize it and normalize it in certain instances through like a Z-score, a T-score. Percentiles are great. And then STIN scores as well. Some people like to use those as well. It's kind of whatever's digestible within your organization, and hopefully you have consistency between kind of what you're putting out and what the rest of the organization is putting out. Maybe from an analytics perspective. But yeah, other than that, I think to expand on that just a little bit more is I'd say basic just data visualization skills. You think about if you're going to put tables together, being able to conditionally format tables, looking at bar and column charts, if you're looking to compare means, things of that nature. Line graphs are great for showing longitudinal trends, and then box plots, things of that nature for data dispersion and getting a sense of kind of the range of the data. But you can keep extrapolating that out and just keep going as far as skills. But I would say, if you can, have a sense of, of those skills, I think those 4 or 5 points there, I think that would be really beneficial as a strength conditioning coach.
Just on the data visualization side, and I'd like to dive a little bit deeper, because this is getting, I mean, you're more in this world than I certainly am, but I think how well that kind of content is received on social media means it gets super popular, whether it's people visualizing things in Google Sheets or Excel or whatever it is. It does get a lot of attention because it's, people make stuff look really nice, and really appealing to the eye. In terms of principles, I know you've mentioned a couple there, but is there any principles that you live by, certain things that you thought would work but absolutely fell on deaf ears, and you'd never go there again for various different reasons, or things that were the opposite that you'd think never work but have actually worked? Any principles that you live by?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing to me personally is whatever you're displaying needs to be displayed accurately and honestly, and that's the first priority, as best you can. You think about simple things such as having your axis go to 0, so it's not deceitful when you're looking at differences between means or something of that nature. Using error bars, things of that nature when you can. Being able to look at the use of both box plots and scatter plots together, looking at dispersion of data, looking at data distribution, histograms, and things of that nature. So I guess trying to be as honest as you can with how you're displaying data, I think is most important. And I think also, I guess to go off of that a little bit more, and I love the write up that Johan Wendt did on Sportsmith. It was wonderful. I thought he did just an amazing job, and I was really honored that he was able to use the combine package that I had put out. But he hit on some points there that I'll, kind of back up and echo and things that I've found throughout my career. And the first one is aesthetics. I'm a big one just on aesthetics. I like to be creative. As I mentioned before, I work primarily in R, and you have wonderful packages for both static and dynamic charting and plotting and things of that nature. R is really great for visualization if anyone's looking to get into a programming language. But I think you want to create things that are attractive to the eye, right? You want them to be clean. You want them to look professional. It shows essentially that you care, that you care what they're looking at, and you've put time and effort into it. I think that they're going to want to look at the data that you're presenting. You also, I think, to piggyback off that just a little bit, you think about all the time and effort that went into the entire data process and pipeline, because it's not just you collecting data. Depending on the organization that you're in, most of the time, strength conditioning coaches are assisting with certain aspects of data collection. Sports medicine practitioners, whether it's PTs, ATCs, you have analytics who've built out APIs and pipelines for game stats and things of that nature. So the things that you're presenting have a lot of effort behind them. So I think it would be a disservice to present ugly charts and graphs. So I try to focus on aesthetics as much as possible, and that comes down to also, you think about branding, putting logos, images, things of that nature. Anything you can do to make it look clean and professional for your organization, I think people are going to appreciate. I think also things like if you can have organizational consistency on how you present information, or I'm sorry, like how you display information. So you think about like color theming, just simple things such as background, whether you're going to go all white or maybe a light gray. Ideally you wouldn't have some sort of obnoxious like bright color, but you would want consistency and neutral colors, and just make sure that hopefully you're getting consistency between departments, whether it's the sports medicine and performance department, the analytics department, and so forth. I think also things such as fonts.
I was thinking exactly.
Try to keep...
I was thinking, is he going to mention fonts? Yes, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's important. Yeah. Fonts, I would say you definitely want to keep consistency as much as you can. Like whenever I create, so I write like web applications, and I build both static and dynamic reports, for organizations, and I try to keep, when I'm working for a particular organization, I try to keep everything relatively consistent as far as backgrounds and color themes and things of that nature. So you're not feeling like you're going into a new, system when you're viewing, charts and graphs and visualizations and things of that nature. Yeah, I mean, main things, try to be as honest as you can, try to be as aesthetically pleasing as you can. I'm a huge proponent of just interactive charts and also being flexible. So I say interactive because I like to build interactive tools, predictive, web apps and tools and things of that nature. But some individuals in your organization, they just want to look at a PDF report. Which is great and fine, and you need to be prepared for that too. You need to be able to put that into a digestible, I guess, static form, as opposed to having an interactive tool where somebody can explore with a little bit. So there's a spectrum, and you need to kind of cater to what individuals want to look at.
I bet your marketing department love you. You just described their brand guideline document that is sounds like it's been copied and stuck to by the T. So yeah, good work. Sounds great.
That's no. I think as I said, just try to be. That's always been the way that I've been. Though I think if you're taking pride in what you're doing, you're going to try to really focus on it and try to make it look as good as you can.
One difficult question that I'm going to put to you now, Ryan, when it comes to data and how you collect it, present it, visualize it, how do you measure the impact of that 90% of your time?
Yeah, it's certainly a challenging question, because you think about, you know, what do individuals or what do organizations care about? And they care about wins and losses, primarily. I mean, so you think about how multifactorial and complex, things such as wins and losses are. So at the end of the day, you're hopefully not going to be judged, 100% on wins and losses, but you want to try to affect those as best you can. I think from a performance and medical perspective, you focus on things such as injuries. I think, over time, organizations, based on where they're at and the system that they're delivering, they're going to regress to the mean. So you may have one particular year where, you've had a rush of injuries in a particular area, or the front office, brings in a free agent or somebody that it's a long-term rehabilitation project. So he's already going to miss, or she's already going to miss 3/4 to the full season. And that goes on to, your overall, games missed and kind of how your, the aggregate statistics that you display at the end. But I think in general, you want to try to influence and try to mitigate injury risk. Use things such as injury rates, per exposure hour, I think are meaningful metrics. Looking things such as seasonal player availability. Look at, the amount of games that are lost. And you can extrapolate, based on the player's worth, what the actual financial, burden of those injuries are. And I won't, call any, teams out, but I mean, we have information. I mean, you collect information on, the player contracts and how many games they've lost. So you can understand, the amount of money that some organizations, and if you aggregate that, are losing, and if you aggregate that over, a period of 5 to 7 years, I mean, for some organizations, it's in the billions with a B. It's a lot of money. So those are things that you're trying to impact, through injuries, trying to save the organization as much money as possible. Also, anthropometrics like body composition, trying to improve or maintain, body composition over a rigorous season. The NBA is quite challenging, so you try to, positively affect, the athlete from a physical and physiological aspect the best you can. And then there's always like performance aspects that you're trying to improve throughout the season. Stronger, faster, better, change of direction. Hopefully that's translating on court. But yeah, I mean, that's why you collect lots of different types of data, because, you're going to be asked to quantify that by the organization.
I don't mean to throw all these kind of polarizing topics your way, Ryan, especially in the first half hour of sort of talking for the first time, but injury prediction, that's something that is very much on people's minds and has been for quite a while, but I think even more so now with certain technologies that have been used by people that are winning leagues and winning championships and things like that. Not to go too much into it and spend the next half hour on it, but I'd love to get your take on this whole area.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, just for me personally, because it was something that throughout my time at UConn and throughout my PhD, it's what I really focused on, because we were doing large scale research projects. My dissertation was on a 12-team, 3-year prospective cohort study where we were looking at NCAA Division I soccer athletes, and we were working with all these different institutions and coordinating large projects and large sports science athlete monitoring projects, because the NCAA at that point in time had some, interests in altering their schedule and understanding kind of how the schedule was impacting injuries and so forth. So I dove kind of headfirst into the injury analytics space and really tried to understand the beast, that we're dealing with. And I would say, Sam Robertson obviously is the authority on this particular issue. He's put out numerous threads and podcasts, so I would refer listeners to him. Certainly, he's developed these thoughts about injury prediction a little bit more than I have. But from my understanding, I tried to go back, to understand injury at the core, because I think to understand injury prediction, you have to understand the complexity of injury in and of itself. And I settled on, complex systems theory. And essentially it goes back to, how complex injuries occur are related to essentially this complex systems problem. And what is a complex system? Well, I guess like the most, simple definition that I could find is essentially a whole, so us being humans, with unit parts that are interacting with each other dynamically. And what are units or parts? I like to think of them as both modifiable and non-modifiable risk factors that are influencing your behaviors and how things are occurring in sport. So you think about things such as biomechanical factors, so dynamic joint stabilities in the hip and the knee. You think about behavioral factors, running mechanics, things of that nature. Physical factors like non-modifiable, such as age, and then modifiable, such as range of motion, in particular areas, or mobility. Psychological, such as mood, and then, physiological aspects that are influencing kind of our readiness or fatigue state, or risk, or I guess adaptive profile per se. You think about like HRV or resting heart rate, kind of gives us an indication of overall physiological status. But you think about all these things that are dynamically changing and interacting with one another, and what I've come to understand is what's called a web of determinants, where the determinants are all these factors and they're connected and they're reacting with one another dynamically and non-linearly. And they lead to, as I mentioned before, kind of a risk or protective profile. So you think about someone who doesn't sleep well, or is inefficient at sleeping. They're influencing kind of more of the risk profile, as opposed to someone who's focusing in that particular area. That's influencing a factor that is positively affecting the individual. So I guess not to go too deep into the weeds here, it's important, I think, to understand that all these factors are interacting with one another. They're all dynamic. They're all interacting linearly, and they're causing, once you have the emergence of what's called some sort of emergence phenomena, whether it's, I'm running and I'm reaching out for a ball, or overstriding or something of that nature, all these factors are affecting whether you incur a hamstring strain. And then once that occurrence happens, whether you are completely fine and your hamstring adapts, or you have an injury, you have what are called recursive feedback loops, which essentially are again affecting those factors that are playing. So you're never the same. You're always changing. So you think about that in an injury prediction standpoint. You identify risks, or you identify patterns, which is why you use different machine learning tools. You think about random forests or decision trees, neural networks, things of that nature. Those algorithms are based or are able to find patterns. They're pattern recognition algorithms. But when you start to think about the volume of information that you would need to collect, based on those 5 or 6 factors that I just said, it's staggering. So I think that's kind of the basis for me of where, just understanding the complexity of injury, I think is important before you kind of get into and really understand injury prediction, because you start to question, how much information is being collecting, by these organizations. They're getting information on, if they're working with teams, they're getting GPS, they're getting schedule, they're getting game measures, things of that nature. They might be, getting some sort of internal, either subjective or objective information from the organization, but how descriptive is that, or how complete is that going to be, because you have all these factors that are interacting with one another. So I think the next logical question is, what would you need to do to have a successful prediction algorithm? And I go back to what Sam, his famous tweet of essentially, I think he said injury prediction is a waste of time. I think that's what he said.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. And I thought about that, and initially my reaction was, because I love injury analytics and prediction, I had to think about it for a little bit. But you think about the time and the resources and the amount of data, I would have to agree for most organizations and most teams, especially if you're just collecting information on your team on a small subset of guys, injury prediction is a complete waste of time. You'd be better served working in other areas. So you think about what you would need. You would need an established data infrastructure. You would need pipelines for data storage and cleaning. You would need really good data quality on all those different factors that we mentioned. So you would need to have techs that have, are valid, reliable, have minimal error. You would need a diversity of data sources, all those factors that I mentioned. You would need a very large volume of data, so not just a small subset of 15 to 20 athletes. You would need multiple athletes, multiple teams over multiple years, and you would need thousands and thousands of injuries. It's hard to quantify exactly how much you would need to get accurate pattern recognition, but you would need a very large amount of injuries. You would need someone, whether you're outsourcing that or whether you've got someone internal, you would need to, it comes down to paying for that particular resource, because you would need someone with machine learning experience, somebody who has expertise in modeling what's called a class imbalance problem, which injury prediction is a class imbalance problem. You think fraud analytics fraud analytics and insurance. It's the same type of problem, because most of the time no injury is occurring. 99% of the time no injury is occurring. 99% of the time there's no fraud. But you need to understand kind of how to deal with that that class imbalance problem. So somebody experienced in that particular area. You would need engineers to deploy a model and the predictions. As I mentioned before, you would need not only a high number of athletes, but you need a diverse, pool of athletes to help generalize the model. You would need, you think about what would be ideal, because most of the prediction algorithms from various companies, they're giving you predictions, before the session. But ideally, in the real world, you're accumulating load during a session. You'd want to have that information, and you'd want that algorithm to be running, real time or near real time to tell you, okay, I need to, ease up or do more in this particular area, whether that's, volume or intensity metrics and so forth. But that just isn't possible currently with computing power, and it's just not a possible thing. I think the bigger issue is what Sam has hit on, and it's his first point, in his tweet, which is the issue of what are called true positives. So whenever you are doing predictions, 1 versus 0, you have, what actually occurred versus what you predicted. And a true positive is essentially you predicted it and it occurred. and that presents an unethical scenario. If you predict it and you have some sort of inclination, then an athlete is going to get hurt, and you don't pull them, or you don't alter their session. That would be unethical. And I think just kind of the final point in that particular area is, whenever you're getting predictions from one of these algorithms, you're getting probabilities. And you could take the higher probability, whether that's a 1 or a 0, and say, they're going to get injured or not. But you could also use that as a continuous variable, in the sense of you then have to decide what is a high enough probability for you to do. And that's when Sam talks about operationalizing. Like, how do we just select what is the appropriate probability to alter someone's activity or arrest them? It's a difficult problem that I don't think anybody has an answer to.
Very comprehensive. I like it. We've been diving into that was quite a while ago. I think he did an update on it not long ago, but I think the original thread that he did a couple of years ago was very interesting. Very interesting indeed. Just to move on to the more day-to-day stuff, and I've got to be respectful here of what you can and aren't able to share from an organisational perspective. But I want to dive into ensuring athlete buy-in and long-term consistency with the assessments that you run at the organisation, the players, and the data that you collect. And I just want to get an insight into what your day looks like when it comes to the testing and assessments of the athletes that you work with. And then there's loads of questions that I want to ask off the back of that. But just to get a bit of a day in the life of Ryan would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely for any organization. Those are questions that you have to answer a little bit more generally. But I think from a data collection standpoint. So a big part of my role is helping to manage and assist in data collection processes, is helping to build out reporting systems, automating data flows, answering research questions, building modeling tools, things of that nature. That's kind of my day-to-day, in addition to kind of my performance responsibilities. But you think about like data, that you would need or want to have. Generally, I think everyone would agree, for the most part, that you would need some sort of sense of what the athletes are doing, what type of stress they're being exposed to, and you do that through several means. You have you're trying to capture load. A lot of times it's through a wearable technology. The Kinexon is very popular in the NBA, as well as Catapult. So different teams are using different wearable technologies in conjunction with some sort of internal load monitoring system. Usually that's heart rate. A lot of organizations are also getting session RPE, things of that nature, to try to quantify internal stress. But in general, you think about the NBA. It's an 82-game season. It's 3-4 games per week. It's very condensed schedules. Lots of challenges with managing stress. So ideally, you would want to quantify the stress that's being imposed on the athlete from a training and game perspective. Load, I think, is an important one. I think the NBA is kind of and even the Spurs in general have kind of brought this load monitoring, terminology to light. It was meant in a different context before, but I think as much as you can quantify what the athletes are doing, I think is important to help manage the stress. Other information that I think you would need to help do your job effectively is very detailed information on injuries, which is difficult, because you think about like what the athletes that on your team and in your organization, exactly what's happening. You have access to detailed information, imaging, things of that nature, so exactly where the athlete is and what the injury is. But you also want to have a sense of what other athletes in the sport in the league, or what injuries are they occurring, and oftentimes that's very difficult, depending on how athletes' injuries are coded, and trying to decipher, was that game missed because of a particular injury, or was it rest and recovery? So it's a little bit more challenging, but to be able to compare yourself to other organizations and to the league in general, as I was mentioning, looking at injuries and injury rates and so forth and availability, you want to have a sense of what kind of everybody's doing, to help show kind of what you're doing, and how your system is working. But again, what is an injury? That's a difficult question. Is it something that leads to any sort of time loss, whether that's in a training session or a game or match, whatever you want to call it? Is it resulting in only games missed? Is it, I've heard some people want more conservative measures of injury, like 3 games missed. So each organization has to decide kind of how they decide what they're going to code as an actual injury. There's just a lot of complexity around there. And then I think in general, just athlete profiling data, you have to show, that you're making positive changes with athletes. I already talked about things like anthropometrics, looking at strength. There's different ways of measuring strength, and different teams are going to do different things, whether that's 3 rep maxes, or using a force plate and doing IMTP, using various other force-based technologies. You think about what's the primary movement of the sport? It's running. So you would probably want to have a sense of their running mechanics, sprinting mechanics, different ways of looking and quantifying that. Looking at asymmetries, I think, are also important. You want to quantify their ability to jump. Jumping, there's a lot of vertical displacement in basketball, so you want to know how they're landing and absorbing forces and redistributing those forces. So changing direction, their ability to decelerate. Foundational movement patterns are important. Do they have good, single leg strength? Are they good bilaterally as well? Are they explosive? And then a sense of, obviously, their cardiovascular fitness is important, which the gold standard would be some sort of VO2 max test, which can be quite difficult to get an athlete to do. So you might have to be creative in those. Some organizations have to be creative in regards to how you assess what the actual fitness status of the athlete is.
Is there any measures or any data points that you have introduced and then reduced, removed from the program, removed from the setup? Or is there anything that you thought was... 2 questions in one here, Ryan, sorry. If there's anything that you thought wasn't going to be useful, but you introduced it and it's become more useful. One thing that I just, as an example, spoke to one guy who heads up the performance and rehab at Irish Rugby, and it was they were running through his daily monitoring program, and it was an ISO calf monitoring tool that they introduced, and that became a little bit more sensitive than some other stuff. So yeah, just having, and again, very sensitive for what's going on in the organisation. But is there anything that you can elaborate on there?
Yeah, I think because we talk about this a lot and we think about this a lot, and I would say I can speak in generalities in the sense that the biggest point that you need to consider when you're implementing a new technology or implementing a new measure, you're trying to add something to your program, is evaluating. Number one, you're going to have a specific question or a specific gap that needs to be filled, and that has to come first. It has to be something relevant. Maybe you have various technologies looking at different areas, whether that's sleep or load or their ability to produce force, things of that nature. If you're adding information that is overlapping, then that obviously is not useful. So it has to begin with a question, a research question or a gap that you have, to help feed your information and your your decision support system. As far as like what's removed or even like what's not used, I think it's important to have, you know, a very solid technology vetting system. So you need to work with these companies before you implement them with athletes, to better understand the validity, things such as validity, reliability. Hopefully they've had some sort of published works, if not at least white papers, or they've done research with other organizations that they can share. And you just want to be very, my experience, very thorough, because obviously the goal of tech companies is to sell their tech, and they may not be answering a question that you have specifically. So you don't want it to overlap with what you already have currently. It needs to fill some sort of gap. The data collection itself, depending on the maturity of your data infrastructure, it can't be cumbersome to deal with. You can't have to invest a lot of resources. You think about things such as like exporting CSVs, manually cleaning and then uploading to an AMS. Somebody has to physically do that, and that takes time away from what they could be focusing on or what they could be doing. So, techs that have APIs, that linked, with your management system, things of that nature, where it's not difficult to get that information and get that data. And I think kind of the last point in that area that I'll hit on just generally is you have to seek. I would say you have to seek feedback on what you're implementing from coaches, from staff, because if you're receiving poor buy-in and maybe what you're having them wear is not comfortable, or they just don't want to do it, it's time consuming, it's really not worth your time to really push that technology. So those are things that you just have to generally need to be aware of.
Perfect. Right, I'm going to ask you just a couple more questions on probably what we're going to originally ask at the start and dive into at the start, but I think it'd be nice to finish off with. And from someone with your varied experience, coming from collegiate, military, tennis, and then into basketball, how did you add value early on? How did you show your worth in them first 3, 6, 9 months coming into an organisation? I think this is more pertinent than ever as more people switch from sport to sport. I suppose like 10 years ago, you'd be a basketball guy, or you'd be a football guy, a rugby guy, a cricket guy, baseball guy. Now, there's this kind of mixture of skills, and people are actually seeking out more diverse skill sets from other sports and organisations. So I think this question is more pertinent than ever, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and that's definitely been kind of the trajectory of my career. I've had opportunities to work in different sports, different domains, even the military, collegiate environment, pro sports environment, as an athletic trainer, as a strength coach, and sports scientist, and so forth. And I think working in different industries, there are pros and cons, obviously, but I think in general you can develop a pretty broad skill set. You think about like the different movement patterns in different sports that you're exposed to. You think about the different injuries, chronic overuse injuries and things. That it's going to be much different in tennis than it is going to be in basketball or even the military. So you get exposure to managing, treating, rehabilitating, different types of injuries, and then also designing preventative and corrective programs and monitoring programs around the needs of those sports. So you develop kind of this overall broad skill set, and then you try to based on the sport that you're in, try to hone it to what the needs are of that particular sport. But I think in general, I guess just talking personally, I think when you have experience in different sports and different organizations, you start to understand what's normal, and what's not normal. And you think about that from a positive and negative standpoint. You know, you're, often get in with organizations, and the connection is great. There's good communication between medical and performance, and everything's very effective and efficient. And you learn that is a great work environment. And then you're in another work environment where maybe that communication is not as good, or maybe there are other cultural barriers, things of that nature. So you start to get a sense of what's normal and what's not normal. And that helps you, I think, to tease out kind of in the interview process as much as you can. It's hard to know until you actually get into the organization, but oftentimes you can get a sense of kind of what you're stepping into. I think the main thing is, just different perspectives. You're working with, just by nature of it, you're learning to work with different personalities in a wide range of people, just because you're exposed to so many different types of people. I think that can be a skill set in and of itself, because I think it's just sometimes many of the problems in the workplace are dealing with those that you work with. Other times not. It just depends on the situation that you're in. But you look to build relationships and communicate with all types of different people. And I think also, if I'm talking about what the benefits of varied experience, I think about like my challenges when I was working for the Marine Corps versus my challenges or my situation here in the NBA. In the military, I was hired as kind of the first strength conditioning coach and athletic trainer at that particular base. There was no structure. There was no infrastructure. We were building out what was called a sports medicine and injury prevention program. But being the first person on that base, the first contractor in the human performance space, there was nothing to go off. So we were charged with setting up this sports medicine and injury prevention clinic where Marines could come and receive injury management, treatment, rehabilitation, return to duty services, things of that nature. So we had to bring those people in. Also, there was no injury prevention program. Drill sergeants had zero interaction, with strength conditioning coaches. So you had to learn how to, draw those people in and help, teach them how you could support their role. And I think about, you compare that with the Spurs, who, and other NBA organizations, very mature, in their structures. So you need a different skill set to be able to add value, in a mature system such as that. So in general, I think it's good to get exposure. You learn lots of different things. You learn how to work with lots of different people. As far as like your question about adding value, I think it's a great question because it is difficult, I think, at the beginning, especially if you're coming in from a sports science / data science perspective, because there's lots of information that you need to understand as far as data sources and structuring and the infrastructure of databases and how to extract information that you're trying to that you would need to create reports and interactive tools, things of that nature. But I think before that, based on my experience, the first priority whenever you come into an organization, number one, is just to establish relationships. I think that should be the primary focus to help you to be effective in your job moving forward. So meeting, having conversations with coaches, with medical personnel, with analytics, with front office, and just building those relationships out, and then also trying to observe and understand the current system that's in place, rather than trying to bring what you've done with other organizations to the forefront right at the beginning. I think it's super important to understand the system in place and look for ways to help optimize it. So the most so first priority is establishing relationships, understanding the system you're in, and then understanding would be, understanding why you're being hired. Based on my experience, in most instances, you're hired for a particular reason, and usually it's a particular skill set that you're bringing to the organization. And if you're working in the NBA or NFL or pro sport, more than likely you're experienced in multiple domains, so you can also fill gaps in other areas as needed. But that's not your primary responsibility. So in those first 3, 6, 9 months, my recommendation, based on what I've seen and experienced, is really try to own that particular area that you were brought in. You're probably going to know from the interview process. You're going to know, from your first few weeks of being there, specifically how you can help the organization. But really focusing on that initially, I think, is very important. Looking for ways to improve efficiency, automating tools would be things, from a sports science, data science perspective that you would look to affect. And then I think, just in general, just to finish up on that, being a problem solver, not necessarily looking for problems, but based on your experience, you're gonna see what has worked in other organizations, what hasn't. You're gonna be exposed to that system, and it's about finding solutions to maybe some inefficiencies that are in that particular area that you're focusing on. I think those are some of the quick ways that you can add value initially.
Love it. Answering the first question last, which I think is a nice way to finish up the conversation. So I really appreciate your time, Ray. I know you push for time based on your schedule over in Vegas, but anyone that wants to get in touch with you about anything that we discussed, or just wants to keep in touch with you on social media, where's the best place?
Yeah, the LinkedIn or Twitter typically. I think Twitter is under at Ryan N _Curtis. I think I'm not positive on my handle there, but yeah, I'd say Twitter, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always looking to connect with individuals in the space. So
Love it.
Feel free to reach out.
Right, I'm going to let you get back to it. But really appreciate your time, Ryan. Great to finally put a face to an email address, face to a name, and look forward to catching up soon. Thanks again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cheers, Ryan.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.